Hello, welcome to Jewish Museum Milwaukee's Museum Moments. Today, I've clearly brought in a little set decoration here because we are talking about the Milwaukee Bucks. And this is the first part of a two-part series on the Milwaukee Bucks. I'm going to try and focus on some stories maybe that are lesser known, maybe that are well known, but were less known to me. And I'm excited for all of you to jump in and share your Milwaukee Bucks stories, history, and I think it's such an interesting franchise. And really right now is an incredibly exciting time to be engaging about the Bucks and with the Bucks. And that's why this week is celebrating them. I mean, they ended before COVID with the best record in basketball. We have a lot of excitement going into this crazy end of season playoff thing that's about to start, kick off next week in Walt Disney World. And I wanted to get into a little bit about the history before we got to the present, before we got to the excitement next week. So today we launch the Milwaukee Bucks. So the Bucks are actually not the first professional basketball team to be in the city of Milwaukee. The first Milwaukee professional basketball team was a team called the Milwaukee Hawks. The Milwaukee Hawks were pretty terrible. They were here for 4 years and never had a winning record. And when they left for St. Louis before finally going on to Atlanta does seem to have a tendency of getting Milwaukee franchises down the line, that there was this kind of strike against Milwaukee in the National Basketball Association. Milwaukee had not been able to field a good team. Milwaukee had not rallied around the Milwaukee Hawks. If you look at that time frame, that 1950s time frame, that's right when the Braves were here and doing amazingly. So there was a lot of enthusiasm for the Braves, very limited enthusiasm for the Hawks. And so there really is this sense that maybe this isn't a basketball city. Maybe it's about football and not about other sports. And maybe baseball was even by the 60s when the ownership group starts looking to put it together. Maybe it's not even a baseball city anymore. So you get a lot of this pushback early on as the eventual owners start putting together the pieces. What I actually got a lot of my research from, and this is from one of our members, is actually her father is Marvin Fishman, who wrote this book. It's called Bucking the Odds. And he was one of the original owners of the Bucks. And initially, his big thought was he wanted to bring any professional sports to Milwaukee. So he starts working on a number of different things. You can see Mr. Fishman in this picture, also with Wes Pavlon, who we'll get to in a second. So Mr. Fishman, Marv Fishman, was a real estate executive. He decides there needs to be a pro team in Milwaukee. At this point, you don't have baseball, you don't have basketball, and football's in Green Bay, as Robin pointed out in her comment. And football's playing some games here, but it's not. His sense is that if we got a football team, and remember, this is when the AFL and the NFL are separate, that is going to be, it would be a bonanza. And for 10 games a year, because that was the schedule, the 3 that Green Bay played here, plus the 7 that would be played by whatever this Milwaukee team, they would sell out. It would be huge. He was going to do it at County Stadium. And they start pushing towards this agenda of having a football team. And he gets a line of credit from a bank of $900,000 to make this happen. He has all sorts of people interested. And Vince Lombardi says, no. There's not going to be a competing Milwaukee football team. And they put the kibosh on it. And that kind of ends his career, his thoughts of having a professional team in Milwaukee. Then he starts thinking about basketball. And he goes and he starts pushing and doing all of these things and using the same kind of leverage, saying, hey, I already have this put together for a football team. Maybe we could do this for a basketball team. And he starts reaching out to the NBA. Now, we'll talk about this a little bit later. There's actually a competing team at the same time, a competing offer that was going, that I believe Herb Kohl was trying to organize, but he actually withdraws. And so Fishman becomes the person who is bringing basketball to Milwaukee. And he reaches out to this other gentleman, Wes Pavlon. Pavlon becomes the kind of face of the Bucks at this time. Pavlon is when the Bucks come to Milwaukee, he's 34 years old. He had created an empire around something called Career Academy. And it's funny when you read stories, there's a great story in the SI Vault about Pavlon that he basically, this was like a training program for TV repair, for air conditioning repair, for all sorts of different technical classes. And for many of these, he was actually writing the training manuals, which would mean that he'd call up doctors, nurses, television repairmen, and he'd spend time talking to them and then translate what they were saying into layman's terms. And it was a multi-million-dollar business. It was big and growing. It was in cities all over the country, and he was based in Milwaukee. So Fishman brings Pavlon on, and Pavlon brings a lot of money with him and a lot of enthusiasm and excitement. And they go through all of these negotiations with the NBA where they're saying, we want to be your expansion team. There's a sense that they're going to be 2 expansion teams. And at the end of the 68 season, or at the beginning, they announced that Milwaukee is one of those 2, the other one being in Phoenix. And there was a lot of East Coast skepticism. This is an article from the AP at that time where it says the National Basketball Association owners peered into their crystal balls and saw a league with 18 teams and decided to go where the action isn't. And they were pretty negative. There was a lot of this kind of press, especially from the East Coast media, saying, why would anyone want to play in Milwaukee? No one's going to want to go to Phoenix. No one's going to want to be in those places. So why would they want to have teams there to begin with? And you get this kind of negative energy. And really it spurred on this sense of, for both Pavlon and Fishman, to make a good product. By they're working hard on selling tickets. I believe that by the first season, even after having a bad first season, that they had averaged over 6,000 attendees to a game at a arena that only fit 11,000. So it was a pretty big success to start. Let's talk about the name Bucks, because, you know, it's an interesting name. It's where does it come from? And it was one of the names that they had initially keyed off on, that they wanted to call the team the Milwaukee Bucks. But there was a concern about the coded messages in that word buck, especially around kind of the sense of slavery and what that meant. So interestingly, which was not a context that I had put together with this, because I think I'm so associated with the deer and those things, but at that point, they're like, if we're calling this team the Bucks, is this going to have some sort of bad connotation, which is interesting, especially if you think about all of the issues around naming today. And they go and they talk to Father Grappi, the leader of much of the civil rights marches in 68, to say, do you think that this is problematic? He says no, but they decide we're not quite sure that we're ready to pull the trigger on this. We don't know that this is the right name. So they launch a campaign, statewide campaign, where people write in with their suggestions. And the winner is going to get a 1968 AMC Javelin. And there's a second place prize and a third place prize. And over 14,000 people enter this. And in fact, Bucks was not the top vote getter. The top vote getter was the Robins. And after that, it was actually the Clippers, then the Pioneers. The Bucks were the 4th overall vote getter. But one of the big things that they pushed was that whoever was presenting their vote had to be able to say why they thought this was the right name. And the winner was a guy named Artie Treblecox, who is from Whitefish Bay, actually. And he says, Bucks are spirited, good jumpers, fast and agile. These are exceptional qualities for basketball players. And that's where the name comes from. So that 1968 season, they're the worst team in the league, but they do the best of any expansion team. And they win. They actually launch in the middle of that season a 6-game winning streak, which is a challenge. Because one of the big things that Fishman saw about entering the league in 1968 is that Lou Alcindor, the best player in college basketball, is on the horizon. And you need to lose enough games to be in contention to get the number 1 draft pick. And so in that moment where they're suddenly maybe challenging Detroit to be the 2nd worst team in the league, there's this real concern. No, but they didn't feel like they could tell Coach Larry Costello to hold back, because that would be interference. I know we've seen this a lot in pro football, where people are are doing poorly in order to get a draft pick. This was the case here, but in this case, they lost fair and square. And it comes down to a coin flip with Phoenix, who had actually lost way more games than they do. And they called heads, and it landed on tails. And the rest is history. Lou Alcindor comes to Milwaukee, and it was actually big in question of whether he would do that. The sense was that he wanted to be in New York or LA. And later he does actually pressure the management for a trade to LA. He's from New York. He had played in LA. He's a big city guy, and the Midwest is not really his area. But he says initially, give me your best and final offer, and that's what I'm going to take. At the same time that the Bucks are competing for Lou Alcindor, who becomes Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the American Basketball Association is thinking, if we can bring Lou Alcindor in, he can maybe save this league. He can be the kind of that player. And so they put in a monetary offer as well, but they don't do their best offer. Their best offer comes after he's already signed on to Milwaukee. And he really was super principled in that, I'm not here to be on the auction block. I'm here to play basketball and to do this. And he does, and he comes in and immediately turns the tide. Within 2 years of him joining the team, he takes them to the national championship. And it's really an amazing team with lots of different characters and flavor. One of the big additions to this team is Oscar Robertson, who had played for many years and had been an all-star for many years. So you come in, and I see it. It was great to watch him play from Robin, so thank you. So he comes into the league and totally changes the way the game is played, changes the way the Bucks play, and makes everybody on the court better. So it's an interesting story in that way that you get all of these characters together at the same time who are really playing at their peak. And Fishman really feels like this is going to be the beginning of a dynasty. And they do continue that, in 70, they're in the playoffs. They continue to make it year after year, but they never get back to that point. As time goes on, Pavlon and Fishman sell to Jim Fitzgerald. And in the 1980s, he sells the team to Herb Kohl. And we're going to talk about those teams on Thursday. And actually, I'm going to be joined by a guest, my husband, Mitch Nellis, who was on the original Hoop Troop. So he's going to add his flavor to this. But I really, in thinking about those early teams, it does really, from reading these books, from reading about Pavlon and Fishman and these kind of characters, is that they're creating a culture. And interestingly, if you look on kind of the Bucks history page, they say they build this foundation that has lasted for 50 years. And I think that's what we're really excited about right now, in seeing, in some ways, you have this amazing draft pick who comes as opposed to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who everyone knew was going to be, the draft pick of all draft picks. Giannis, he was a little bit of a wild card, and yet he has brought the Bucks to this next level. And then watching how this team interacts just is so much fun. So I'm excited that this week we can celebrate basketball. I'm excited that next week we can actually watch basketball. I hope you've enjoyed this museum moment. Check us out on Thursday, where we'll take on the latter part of Bucks history. And tomorrow I'm going to be joined in our Conversation Starter series by Alex Lasry, who is the vice president at the Milwaukee Bucks. And he's going to be talking about both the current playoff situation and also all of the kind of civic engagement that we really have. It has been remarkable that the Bucks have been undertaking both recently and in recent years. Thanks so much for joining me and taking a moment out of your day. Have a great one.